Well, today we're going to talk about compound interest and how an ordinary person can become quite rich. Now, I have nothing to add that Einstein didn't already say when he called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. But I'm going to tell you how I actually did it, which is very different from the way most people think about it. Most people hear compound interest and they think it's about putting money in a bank account and waiting 40 years. That's what the financial services industry tells you. Save early, dollar cost average into index funds, be diversified, and then wait. And you know what? I don't quarrel with that advice. It's perfectly sensible for most people, but it's incomplete. It's like having a recipe that just says mix ingredients and cook. Technically correct, sure, but you're missing the important parts. Here's what I actually learned over 60 years. Compound interest isn't just a mathematical formula. It's a way of organizing your entire life. It applies to money, yes, but also to learning, to relationships, to reputation, to habits. Everything compounds. And if you truly understand how to harness that force across multiple parts of your life, the results are remarkable. By the way, I'm Charlie Munger. I'm 99 years old. I've compounded capital at roughly 20% annually for over 50 years. Warren and I built Berkshire Hathaway into a company worth over $700 billion. And I'm going to tell you exactly how we did it. Not by being geniuses, but by avoiding stupidity and letting compound interest do its work. So in this video, and yes, I find it amusing that a man my age is making videos, but here we are. I'm going to lay out the complete system I used to go from a broke, divorced lawyer to someone who made a bit of money. This is the actual playbook, not theory, not motivation, the system that worked. Let's get started. The first thing you need to understand, and most people never grasp this, is that compound interest is really about the rate of return sustained over long periods. Now that sounds obvious, but people consistently miss the implications. Here's what I mean by that. If you compound at 7% for 40 years, you multiply your money by about 15 times. Fine, nothing wrong with that. But if you compound at 20% for 40 years, which is what we did roughly, you multiply your money by over 1,400 times. Not 15 times, 1,400 times. The difference between 7% and 20% sustained over time is not incremental. It's astronomical. Now, why do I bring this up? Because the question then becomes, how do you achieve higher rates of return? And the answer is not. I repeat, not by taking more risk. That's what modern finance theory tells you. They have this capital asset pricing model, this efficient market hypothesis, all these fancy mathematical formulas that say returns are proportional to risk. I say that's twaddle. It's not how the world actually works. The way to achieve higher returns is by being more rational than other people. That's it. It's not complicated. If you can avoid the standard stupidities that afflict most investors, and they're quite predictable stupidities, I might add, you will do better, significantly better. And compounding that advantage over decades produces extraordinary results. Let me give you an example from my own life. When I was young, I worked in my grandfather's grocery store. Ernest Buffett, Warren's grandfather as it happens, tough old bird, had us working 12-hour shifts with no breaks, and we had to pay him 2 pennies at the end of each shift to cover the Social Security tax he was required to pay. He was very opposed to Franklin Roosevelt, you see. Now, most people would just remember that as a miserable job. But I looked at that experience and I extracted lessons that compounded throughout my entire life. I learned that hard work alone isn't enough. You need leverage. I learned that capital allocation matters more than effort. And I learned that you want to own the business, not just work in it. Those insights, acquired as a teenager, shaped every decision I made for the next 70 years. That's real compound interest. The lessons you learn early compound into better decisions later. The books you read make the next books more valuable. The relationships you build lead to better opportunities. It's not just money compounding. It's knowledge, wisdom, and judgment compounding. Now, how do you apply this? You start thinking about everything through the lens of compound interest. When you're deciding what to learn, ask yourself, will this knowledge compound? Will it make future learning easier and more valuable? When you're building habits, ask, will this create exponential returns over time, or just linear returns? When you're choosing relationships, ask, will this person make me better? And will our relationship improve with time? Most people optimize for immediate gratification. They want results now. But I was always willing to delay gratification if it meant getting compound interest working in my favor. I lived far below my means for many years, investing the difference. I spent enormous amounts of time reading and learning, even when there was no immediate payoff. And I built relationships with people like Warren, people who were going to compound my thinking over decades. The reason this matters, and I want to emphasize this, is that if you don't understand the difference between linear thinking and exponential thinking, you'll spend your life working hard and going nowhere. You'll be like the fellow shoveling sand, getting paid by the hour, never realizing that the real money is in building the system that moves sand without you. I once said I wanted to get rich so I could be independent, like John Maynard Keynes. Notice the sequence there. The wealth wasn't the goal. Independence was the goal. Compound interest was the vehicle. The destination was freedom. Freedom to think, freedom to read, freedom to live on my own terms without having some damn fool tell me what to do. Now, understanding this philosophically is all well and good, but it's useless if you can't apply it practically, which brings me to the actual system I used. Now we get to the interesting part, how I actually built wealth, starting from essentially nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean it. In my early 30s, I was divorced, supporting multiple children, working as a lawyer, and I had no capital to speak of. I was broke. Not poor broke, but professionally broke, if you understand the distinction. So I did what any rational person would do. I set up multiple engines running simultaneously. I maintained my law practice. That was engine number one, generating steady income. I started an investment partnership called Wheeler, Munger and Company. That was engine number two, deploying capital into securities. And I made opportunistic real estate investments. That was engine number three, capturing value in property. 3 engines, all compounding independently, but also reinforcing each other. Now, the law practice was never my love. I was a competent lawyer, nothing special, but I understood it was my economic engine. It paid the bills and generated the excess capital I could invest. Too many people fall in love with their profession and forget that it's just a tool. I was brutally pragmatic about this. The law firm was my funding mechanism, not my identity. The investment partnership, that's where the magic happened. I started Wheeler Munger in 1962 with no track record, no reputation, just a system. And that system was based on what I'd learned from Ben Graham, plus my own elaborations on his ideas. You see, Graham taught value investing. buying stocks for less than their intrinsic worth. Perfectly sound approach. But I realized you could do better by combining Graham's quantitative discipline with qualitative judgment about business quality. It's not enough to buy cheap. You want to buy great businesses cheap. That small distinction, sustained over time, makes an enormous difference. I also developed what I call a multiple mental models approach. This is important, so pay attention. Most investors, hell, most people in any field, use a single mental model. Economists think everything is supply and demand. Engineers think everything is optimization. Lawyers think everything is precedent and argument. They're all using one tool. And as I like to say, to the man with a hammer, the world looks like a nail. That's a dumb way to think. The world is complex, interconnected, multidisciplinary. To understand it properly, you need mental models from many fields: physics, biology, psychology, mathematics, history. You need to see the problem from multiple angles simultaneously. For example, when I'm analyzing a business, I'm using the compound interest model for mathematics. Obvious enough. But I'm also using the redundancy model from engineering. Does the business have backup systems? Multiple ways to win. I'm using autocatalysis from chemistry. Does success breed more success in a reinforcing cycle? I'm using Darwinian evolution from biology. What's the competitive fitness of this business in its ecosystem? And I'm using psychological models. What cognitive biases are affecting management decisions and investor perceptions? This multidisciplinary approach gave me an enormous edge. While other investors were doing simplistic financial analysis, I was doing ecosystem analysis. I was seeing things they couldn't see because I had better tools. The results spoke for themselves. From 1962 to 1975, Wheeler Munger compounded at about 28% annually on a gross basis, 20% net to investors after fees. For context, the Dow Jones averaged about 7% during that period, and we had 11 years with no down years at all. Not one losing year in 11 years. Now, we did get our heads handed to us in 1973 and 1974, down 32% and 31% in consecutive years. That was brutal. Our largest holdings, Blue Chip Stamps and New America Fund, got massacred in that bear market. But we didn't panic. We analyzed whether the underlying businesses had deteriorated, concluded they hadn't, and we held on. Sure enough, we came roaring back in 1975, up 73% that year. Over the full 14 years, we compounded at about 20% net. If you'd invested $10,000 with me in 1962, you'd have had about $116,000 by 1975. The same money in the Dow would have been maybe $18,000. That's not a small difference. That's a different universe entirely. But, and this is crucial, we didn't achieve those returns by being busy. We achieved them by being selective. I had 3 baskets for investment opportunities: yes, number, and too tough to understand. Most things went straight into basket 2 or 3. I only invested when I had a genuine edge, and the odds were overwhelmingly in my favor. I used to cite Ted Williams, the baseball player, last man to bat, .400 in a season. He divided the strike zone into 77 cells and calculated his batting average for each cell. He knew that if he only swung at balls in his best cells, high and inside, say, he'd bat .400. If he expanded his range to include marginal pitches, his average dropped to 0.350 or worse. I did the same thing with investing. I only swung at the fat pitches. Problem was, there aren't many fat pitches. So there were long periods where I did nothing, just sat there with cash waiting. That requires character. Most people can't stand to sit idle while everyone else is getting rich in some bubble or mania. But I could. And that patience, combined with aggression when the right opportunity appeared, that's what made the difference. Warren likes to say he could improve anyone's financial welfare by giving them a ticket with 20 investment slots. 20 decisions for their entire life, and that's it. No more. Under those rules, you'd think real hard before investing. You'd wait for the very best opportunities and bet heavily when they appeared. Well, that's essentially what I did. I didn't make hundreds of investments. I made a handful of great ones and held them for a long time. This connects back to compound interest in a fundamental way. Every time you trade, you interrupt compounding. You pay transaction costs, you pay taxes, you make emotional decisions. All of that destroys value. So the default should be inaction. Do nothing. Just let the compounding machine run. Only act when you have a genuine reason to act. And I mean a really good reason. Not just, I'm bored or I saw something on television. Now, here's the tactical application for you. Build your own three-engine system. First, create stable income from a skill or business, something you're competent at that pays well. That's your base. Second, systematically invest the excess in opportunities where you have an edge. That's your compound engine. Third, continuously learn and improve your mental models. That's your intellectual engine. All three engines reinforce each other. Your income funds your investments compound into more income. Your learning makes both your income and investments more valuable. That's a properly designed system. But you can't just have the system. You also need to understand allocation, knowing when to bet big and when to bet small. That's the next critical piece. Now I'm going to say something that will upset the finance professors and the professional wealth managers, but it happens to be true. Diversification is a hedge against ignorance. If you don't know what you're doing, diversify. Buy 50 stocks. Own every asset class. Spread your risk. That's fine. But if you do know what you're doing, if you've studied the business, understand the industry, know the competitive dynamics, evaluated the management, and determined with high confidence that you're buying $1 for 50 cents, then for God's sake, concentrate. Don't bet 1% of your capital. That's insane. Make a meaningful investment. Now, the modern portfolio theory people will tell you I'm wrong. They've got equations proving that diversification reduces risk without reducing returns. It's elegant mathematics, I'll grant them that. But when applied to the real world, mostly twaddle. Here's the reality. Every single person who built significant wealth did it through concentration. Warren made most of his money from a handful of investments. See's Candies, GEICO, Coca-Cola, American Express. Bill Gates, one company, Microsoft. Sam Walton, one company, Walmart. You don't see these people owning 50 stocks at 1% each. They bet heavily when they had an edge. Key phrase, when they had an edge. You can't just concentrate randomly. That's not investing, that's gambling. You need genuine insight that the market lacks. You need to understand something other people don't, or be willing to do what other people won't. My edge came from multidisciplinary analysis. I could evaluate businesses at a depth most investors couldn't match. When I found something that scored well across all my mental models, good economics, strong management, durable advantage, reasonable price, I knew I had an edge. And when I had an edge, I allocated capital accordingly. Let me give you a specific example. Early in my partnership, I invested heavily in blue chip stamps. Most people looked at it and saw a dying industry. Trading stamps going out of fashion, brutal competition, a melting ice cube. But I saw something different. I saw a business generating enormous float, cash from stamps sold but not yet redeemed, capital that could be invested. And blue chip owned See's Candies, a wonderful business with brand power and pricing power. The market wasn't properly valuing See's because it was hidden inside the stamp company. So I made blue chip one of my largest positions. Others thought I was crazy, but I wasn't investing in trading stamps. I was investing in float and See's Candies. I understood the underlying value better than the market did. The result? Blue chip stamps became one of the most profitable investments in my partnership. Eventually, Berkshire acquired the whole company, and See's Candies has generated over $2 billion in cumulative profits. That's what happens when you concentrate capital where you have genuine insight. Now, here's the allocation principle stated clearly. It's far better to own pieces of 5 exceptional businesses than pieces of 50 mediocre ones. Why? Because finding one great business is hard enough. Finding 50 is impossible. You're fooling yourself if you think you can properly analyze 50 companies. You can't. Nobody can. What you can do is thoroughly understand 5 or 10. Really understand them. Know the management. Grasp the competitive dynamics. Follow the industry. Study the unit economics. Do that work properly, and you'll have enough conviction to make meaningful allocations. But most people can't do this. Not for lack of intelligence. Plenty of smart people fail at investing. They fail for lack of temperament. They get scared when a concentrated position drops 10%. They panic when others question their thesis. They lose confidence when the market disagrees for a while. So they sell too early and miss the compounding. I've seen it hundreds of times. Someone does good analysis, buys a great business at a fair price, then sells a year later because it's fully valued, or they want to take profits. That's crazy. If it's a great business and the fundamentals are intact, why would you sell it? Just to do something? That's not rational. That's just scratching an emotional itch. The whole secret of investing, if there is a secret, is buying good businesses and then sitting on your ass, doing nothing, letting compound interest work. But people can't do that. They need action. They need to feel busy. So they trade, and they pay taxes, and they pay commissions, and they make emotional mistakes, and they end up with mediocre returns despite being intelligent. Now let me make this tactical for you. Here's how to implement proper allocation. First, develop genuine expertise in a narrow domain. Don't be a generalist. Go deep in 1 or 2 industries or investment types. Study them until you actually have an edge over the average investor. This might take years. So be it. You're not in a hurry. Second, wait patiently for opportunities where your edge gives you a genuine advantage. This might mean waiting 6 months or a year between investments. That's fine. As I like to say, the big money is not in the buying and selling. It's in the waiting. Third, when you find an opportunity that meets all your criteria, make a meaningful allocation. If you've really done the work, if you truly have conviction, bet 10 or 20% of your capital. maybe more if the opportunity is exceptional and you're absolutely certain. Don't nibble with 1% positions. That's just theater. Fourth, once you've invested, sit on your ass. Don't check the price every day. Don't read what analysts are saying. Don't get shaken out by volatility. If the fundamentals haven't changed, do nothing. Just let it compound. This approach, patient, concentrated, long-term, is the opposite of how most people invest, which is exactly why it works. When everyone else is diversifying into 50 stocks and trading quarterly, you're concentrated in 5 great businesses you plan to hold for decades. Who do you think does better? The allocation principle is the difference between mediocrity and extraordinary results. It's the difference between compounding at 7% and compounding at 20%. And over time, that difference is everything. But even with perfect allocation, you still need the right mental models to actually identify the opportunities. That's what we cover next. Now we come to what I consider the most important part of my entire system, the multiple mental models approach. This is not optional. This is fundamental. And most people never figure this out, which is why they remain mediocre thinkers all their lives. Here's the essential idea. The world is not organized by academic discipline. Physics doesn't stay in its lane. Psychology bleeds into economics. Biology affects business. Everything is connected to everything else. And yet, we educate people in isolated silos. You study economics, you never learn psychology. You study engineering, you never learn biology. It's deeply foolish. I decided early on that I was going to learn the fundamental principles from every major discipline, what I call the big ideas from the big disciplines. And I was going to integrate them into a lattice work of mental models that I could apply to any problem. This took decades of reading and thinking, but the payoff was enormous. Let me give you the specific models I use constantly. From mathematics, compound interest, we've covered that, but also permutations and combinations, which teach you how possibilities explode as variables increase, critical for understanding complex systems. From physics, I use critical mass and breakpoint models. Systems remain stable until they hit a threshold. Then they rapidly shift to a new state. This happens in business all the time. A company struggles for years, then suddenly tips into dominance. Or a successful company looks fine until it crosses some invisible line and collapses. Understanding these phase transitions is crucial. From chemistry, I use autocatalysis. That's when a reaction product becomes a catalyst for more of the same reaction, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. In business, this might be network effects. Each new user makes the product more valuable, attracting more users, making it even more valuable. When you find autocatalysis in business, that's extraordinarily powerful. From biology, I use the modern Darwinian synthesis. Every business is in an evolutionary competition. Those that fit their environment survive. Those that don't go extinct. Understanding what makes a business fit, what gives it competitive advantage in its particular ecosystem, is fundamental to investing. From engineering, I use redundancy and backup systems. The best businesses have multiple ways to win, multiple revenue streams, multiple competitive advantages, multiple distribution channels. If one system fails, others compensate. That's much safer than a business with only one trick. From psychology, and this might be the most important discipline of all, I use the cognitive bias models. Humans make systematic errors in judgment. Confirmation bias, incentive cost bias, authority bias, social proof, commitment and consistency. I've identified about 25 major biases, and I've studied how each one affects decision making. Now, the key insight about psychological biases is this: they affect everyone, including you, including me. You can't eliminate them. They're hardwired into the brain. But you can be aware of them and design systems to counteract them. For example, I know I'm susceptible to confirmation bias, seeking information that confirms what I already believe while ignoring contradictory evidence. So I actively force myself to look for disconfirming evidence. I ask, what would have to be true for my investment thesis to be wrong? I seek out intelligent people who disagree with me, and I listen to their reasoning. I also know that incentives powerfully shape behavior, often in ways people don't consciously recognize. So I always ask, what are the incentives here? What is management incentivized to do? What are analysts incentivized to say? What am I incentivized to believe? Following the incentives explains an enormous amount of human behavior. But here's where the mental models approach becomes truly powerful. It's not just about knowing individual models. It's about understanding how they interact. When multiple models point in the same direction, reinforcing each other, that's what I call a Lollapalooza effect. That's when you get outcomes far larger than the sum of the parts. Take Coca-Cola as an example. Why is it such a successful business? You can't explain it with one model. You need multiple models. Psychology. The brand creates powerful emotional associations. People don't just like Coke, they're attached to it. That emotional attachment creates pricing power. Biology. There are network effects in distribution. The more places that sell Coke, the more valuable the brand becomes, which attracts more distributors, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. Economics. Enormous operating leverage. Once the brand is built, incremental revenue flows almost entirely to profit at high margins. Mathematics. The cash flows compound at high rates with minimal reinvestment required. When psychology, biology, economics, and mathematics all align, when every model points to the same conclusion, you found something rare and valuable. That's when you bet heavily. Now, I need to be honest with you. Building a multidisciplinary latticework of mental models is hard work. It requires reading broadly for decades. It requires thinking deeply about how different fields connect. Most people won't do it because it's time-consuming and there's no immediate payoff. But that's exactly why it's valuable. If it were easy, everyone would do it, and there'd be no advantage. The difficulty is the moat, the sustained intellectual effort required to master multiple disciplines. That's what keeps most investors from achieving superior results. Here's what I recommend. Start with the core disciplines I've mentioned: mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, economics. Read the fundamental texts in each field, not the advanced material, just the big ideas. For psychology, read Cialdini's Influence. For biology, read Darwin and Dawkins. For mathematics, understand probability and statistics. For economics, read Smith and Ricardo. Extract the handful of truly fundamental principles from each discipline. You don't need to become an expert. You just need to understand the core models well enough to apply them. That's maybe 100 mental models in total. Learn them fluently so you can apply them automatically. Then, practice combining models. When you analyze a business or make a decision, deliberately use multiple lenses. Ask yourself, what does psychology say about this? What does biology say? What does mathematics say? Train yourself to think multidimensionally. This approach, drawing on multiple disciplines, seeking Lollapalooza effects, designing systems to counteract cognitive biases, that's what separated my results from the average investor. Not intelligence, not insider information, just better tools for thinking. But even with the best mental models, you still need the temperament to execute properly. And temperament, I'm sorry to say, is largely inborn. I'm going to tell you something that some people find uncomfortable, but it happens to be true. Temperament is more important than intelligence in investing, and temperament is largely genetic. You're either born with the right psychological makeup for long-term thinking, or you're not. Now, people don't like hearing this. We live in a society that wants to believe anyone can achieve anything through hard work, but that's not reality. Some people have the temperament for investing, some people don't. Just as some people have the temperament for being a fighter pilot, and some don't. It's not a moral judgment, it's just a fact. It's a cluster of traits. First, patience, the ability to sit idle for long periods, waiting for the right opportunity, without feeling anxious or left behind. Most people can't do this. They have an action bias. They feel compelled to do something, even when doing nothing is the right move. I can sit on cash for months, even years, without discomfort. I'm not worried about missing opportunities because I know the market will always create them. I'm not comparing myself to investors making money in some temporary mania. I'm content to wait. That's unusual. Second, emotional stability, the ability to remain calm when your portfolio drops 30%, when everyone around you is panicking, when the headlines are screaming doom, when smart people you respect are questioning your judgment. In 1973 and 1974, my partnership dropped over 60% from peak to trough. Most investors would have panicked and sold. I didn't. I analyzed whether the underlying businesses had deteriorated. They hadn't, so I held on. By 1976, we'd fully recovered, but that required serious emotional stability. Third, independence of thought, the ability to think for yourself and ignore what everyone else is doing. Humans are social animals. We're hardwired to conform. Going against the crowd feels wrong. But in investing, the crowd is usually wrong at the extremes, which means you must be willing to be contrarian when it's most uncomfortable. I've always been comfortable being the odd man out. If my analysis says X and the consensus says Y, I don't lose sleep over it. I trust my reasoning. Most people can't do that. They need validation from the group, and that makes them mediocre investors. Fourth, discipline, the ability to follow your system even when it's emotionally difficult. When your process says don't buy, but you want to buy. When it says hold, but you want to sell and take profits. I have ironclad rules and I never violate them. Never. I don't invest in businesses I don't understand. I don't overpay for quality. I don't sell winners just because they've gone up. Those rules have saved me from countless errors. Now here's the uncomfortable part. These traits are largely genetic. You're either born with a patient, stable, independent, disciplined temperament, or you're not. You can improve at the margins, sure. Build systems that compensate for your weaknesses. But the core personality is fixed. If you're naturally anxious, you'll struggle with volatility. If you're social and consensus seeking, you'll struggle with contrarian thinking. If you're impulsive, you'll struggle with patience. No amount of education can change that entirely. 2 recommendations. First, be honest with yourself. If you're temperamentally unsuited for active investing, don't do it. Buy index funds. Forget about them. There's no shame in that. In fact, it's rational. Second, engineer systems that compensate for your weaknesses. Use checklists to enforce discipline when emotions run high. Create rules in advance and commit to following them. Seek out people who challenge your thinking. Limit your exposure to market noise. Don't check prices daily. Even I use these techniques. Why? Because I know I'm human, and humans make systematic errors. The checklist is my defense against my own brain. When I evaluate an investment, I use a written list of questions, not suggestions, requirements. What are the unit economics? What's the competitive advantage? Can I trust management? What could go wrong? What would make me sell? I answer all of these in writing before investing. It keeps me from getting swept up in excitement. I also practice inversion, the Jacobi principle. Invert. Always invert. Instead of asking, why should I buy this? I ask, why should I not buy this? I force myself to make the bear case. I look for disconfirming evidence. And most importantly, I limit my activity. I don't need to be fully invested all the time. I don't feel pressure to put money to work. I'm comfortable holding cash. That removes the psychological pressure that causes people to make mediocre investments just to be doing something. Now let me be direct with you. Warren and I have had extraordinary success. People see that success and want to replicate it, but most can't. And the reason isn't intelligence, it's temperament. Warren is completely unflappable, utterly rational, immune to social proof, extraordinarily patient. I'm similar, though not quite as good. We got lucky in the genetic lottery. You might have different gifts. Maybe you're great at building businesses, leading teams, inventing products, selling ideas. If you don't have the temperament for investing, do something else. But if you have reasonably good temperament, patient, stable, independent, you can absolutely succeed. You won't match our returns, but you can do far better than average. And compounded over a lifetime, that's substantial wealth. The key is honesty about your temperament, designing systems for your weaknesses, and staying within your capabilities. Don't try to be Warren Buffett. Be the best version of yourself. But even temperament isn't enough. You also need to avoid catastrophic errors. Most people focus on what they should do to succeed. I focus on what I should avoid to not fail. It's a different orientation, and it changes everything. I got this from Carl Jacobi, who said, invert, always invert. Instead of asking, how do I get rich? Ask, how do I avoid staying poor? Instead of how do I win? Ask, how do I avoid losing? In investing, that's profound, because losses are asymmetric. Lose 50%, you need 100% just to break even. Lose 90%, you need 900% to recover. So the first rule is don't lose. The second rule is don't forget rule number 1. By identifying all the ways you could lose catastrophically and avoiding them, you don't need to be brilliant. You just need to not be stupid. Here are my automatic numbers. If I don't understand how the business makes money, no. If management is dishonest or incompetent, no. If the price far exceeds intrinsic value, no. If it requires leverage or binary outcomes, no. I systematically eliminate 95% of opportunities. Only then do I look for the few exceptional ones. Most investors start with optimism. I start with pessimism. I assume everything's a bad idea until proven otherwise. The burden of proof is on the opportunity, not me. Take the internet bubble in the late 1990s. Companies with no profits, valued at billions, day traders quitting jobs, new era talk everywhere. I didn't need to understand the internet. I'd studied economic history. I'd seen this movie before. So I inverted. Instead of asking, how can I make money, I asked, how can I avoid losing money? Answer, don't participate. We sat out the tech bubble, looked stupid for a while, then looked very smart when it collapsed. That's inversion. We didn't need brilliance. We just avoided stupidity. Make a list of catastrophes that would ruin you. Create ironclad rules to avoid them. Before any major decision, ask, what are all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong? Study failures more than successes. Use pre-mortems. Imagine you failed. Why? The goal isn't excitement, it's survival. If you don't lose and you invest decently, time and compounding make you rich. You don't need to find the next Amazon. You just need to avoid being the next Enron. As I often say, it's remarkable how much long-term advantage you gain by simply trying to be consistently not stupid instead of trying to be very intelligent. Now, let's talk about something even more important, becoming a learning machine. This is the foundation everything else rests on. I constantly see people rise in life who are not the smartest, sometimes not even the most diligent, but they are learning machines. They go to bed every night a little wiser than when they got up. And boy, does that help, especially over a long run. First, voracious reading. I read constantly, 6 hours a day, even now. Warren's the same. And not just business, history, biography, science, psychology, philosophy. Reading lets you learn from other people's experiences without suffering them yourself. That's an incredible bargain. Second, multidisciplinary learning. Everything is connected. The world isn't divided into subjects. You need models from many disciplines. I learned maybe 100 big ideas from across fields and practiced combining them. That's how I built my lattice work of thinking. Third, learn from mistakes. Most people rationalize them. I dissect them. I rub my nose in them. It's painful and effective. Fourth, constant questioning. I'm always asking why, always testing assumptions, always refining, but I never abandon fundamental principles. If something is timeless, I keep it. Fifth, focus on fundamentals. Take a simple idea and take it seriously. Strip away complexity. Understand the essence deeply. Apply it consistently. I started this process when I was young and never stopped. I'm 99 and I still read for hours every day. Most people stop learning after school. That's a mistake. In a changing world, continuous learning isn't optional. It's mandatory. So read every day. Study multiple disciplines. Keep a learning journal. Seek disagreement. Teach others. Be patient. Knowledge compounds. And unlike money, it has no diminishing returns. In my entire life, I've known no wise people who didn't read all the time. None. Zero. Now let's get practical. How do you implement all this? Here's the actual playbook. Step 1, build a base income. You need income before capital, capital before compounding. View your job as a funding mechanism, not your identity. Live below your means. Save aggressively. Step 2, invest in knowledge before money. Read The Intelligent Investor. Read Common Stocks and Uncommon Profits. Study Berkshire Letters. Build a foundation before you risk a dollar. Step 3, define your circle of competence. Know what you understand. Admit what you don't. Stay within it. Step 4, start small. Learn by doing. Record your reasoning. Study your results. Step 5, create a checklist. Use it religiously. It's your defense against emotion. Step 6, wait for fat pitches. Patience is your edge. Mediocre opportunities, ignore them. Step 7, when you find a fat pitch, bet meaningfully. 10 or 20% positions. No nibbling. Step 8, hold through volatility. Ignore noise. Let compounding work. Step 9, reinvest everything. Dividends, profits, gains, reinvest. Don't interrupt compounding. Step 10, continuously improve. Review, reflect, refine. That's the system. Simple, boring, and it works. So that's the complete system. How I went from a broke lawyer to someone who made a bit of money. It wasn't genius. It wasn't luck. It was compound interest, mental models, temperament, inversion, and continuous learning. Most people won't do it. They'll nod along, then go back to old habits. That's fine. Their mediocrity creates opportunity for the few who will. If you're willing to read, think, wait, act decisively, and hold through volatility, you'll do better than average. And better than average, compounded, is more than enough. You don't need to be a genius, just consistently not stupid. So read widely, think carefully, act infrequently, hold stubbornly, learn constantly, and whatever you do, don't interrupt the compounding.